Today I'm going to show you how I built this welding cart, and I'm going to give you a set of plans so you can go ahead and build your own. The plans will be embedded right into the video, so look for them to pop up as we go along. You can refer back here or take screenshots so you have the information you need when you need it. Before we start, I'm Tim and I make welding videos geared at helping you learn how to weld, set up your shop, and build cool stuff. So if you're into welding, go ahead and click the subscribe and the bell notifications below so you don't miss out on future videos. Also, if you like what you're seeing, go ahead and hit that thumbs up as we go along. So let's talk a little bit about the design on this welding cart. A couple of things that were important to me were to have the cart very rigid. So I used square tubing that's welded all the way around, so it can't wobble around like some of the sheet metal carts. I wanted a handle that I could grab to roll it around, places to hang my cables, and some wheels and casters that were big and sturdy enough that they could roll over a crack in the cement without getting hung up. Before I started the build, I went into Onshape and I modeled the whole thing up virtually so I'd know exactly how it would turn out when I'm finished and exactly what to buy. So from that, I got this bill of materials that you can see here. There's a column for the material description, what size you need, and what it's used for in the build. So this can be your roadmap through the entire build. And feel free to modify it if you need to. And then all of the steel and aluminum, I just got on Online Metals and entered this bill of material right in, put everything in my shopping cart and clicked order. I ordered everything cut to length and it showed up 3 days later in boxes. It was so handy to not have to run to the steel yard and buy too much of each thing. I could just get the right amount. It was like my own personal kit. So once I got all the materials, I was ready to get started with the build. The first step was to weld this bottom rectangle. And I did that by mitering the corners at 45 degrees with my bandsaw. And laying that out on the fixture table. Once I had it laid out, parallel and square, I tacked it really solid in 4 places to reduce distortion and weld it out. One quick tip to reduce distortion is to weld the inside fillet last because that will pull more than anything else. So if you get everything locked in place before you weld that inside fillet weld, then it'll hold a little bit more square. So once everything was welded there's one member to put in place. This sits right in front of the gas cylinder in that rectangle, so I got that tacked and welded in place, and then cleaned those welds up a little bit with a grinder so that things could sit flush on top of them. Next, I took these uprights and I set them in place, and I just used the runners that fit right here front to back. I just set them in place next to the uprights here in the bottom to space them out, to make sure I got my spacing right. That worked out perfectly. So I got the uprights tacked just loosely in place. And then I tacked these runners on the top that go front to back and side to side. I got all of them tacked in place, just loosely. That way I could make any adjustments I needed to, or even if I needed to pull a piece of material out to trim its length or something, it would be easy. I didn't end up having to do that, but I did move it around a little bit to get everything square. Then I added some more tack, so I had a tack at every corner of every piece. Once it was all tacked in place, I went ahead and welded it out. Next, let's talk about making the handle. So the handle's made out of 1-inch round tubing, and I capped both ends just with some spare sheet metal that I cut in a circle and welded around. And then I took the 5/8" tube, cut to 2 inches long, and tacked it centered into the round tubing here. In order to do that, I just set that round tubing on my bench and put a shim underneath this 5/8" tubing and tacked it up in a couple of places, pulled it off and welded it around. So then I took that whole handle assembly, set it up to the cart itself, and welded it in place. So we're done with the handle. Next, let's move on to the heavy gauge shelf for the gas cylinder. So if you flip the cart over there on the table, you can set that heavy gauge plate in place and center it up, and then lay down some weld. Now instead of welding all the way around this, I just put 1-inch welds spaced evenly 3 places on each side. I figure that's plenty to hold it in place because it's going to have the axle sitting right underneath it to support all the weight from that cylinder. So once that was set in place, it was time to move on to putting on the rear wheels and axles. So the axle I ordered a little bit long on purpose because I didn't know exactly how the wheels would sit. So I wanted to trim it to length. So I got the axle set up there. I put a washer on the inside and outside of each wheel. And then I left a 1/4 inch hanging out of each side and marked it for a cut. I cut it to length, and then I ground a little bit flat on each side to make it easier to drill a hole on the drill press. And then I drilled a hole to match the cotter pin that I got, and I drilled it about 1/8 of an inch in from the end on each side. So once that was done, I could go ahead and set the axle in place, center it under the gas cylinder, and then center it side to side and tack it in place. Now I'm moving from the TIG welder to the MIG welder here, just for convenience in welding this in place. Next, I went ahead and I welded a washer on the inside of each wheel. And I did this just so the wheels wouldn't bind up or get stuck side to side, and they'd have a nice bearing surface to rest on. Now moving on to the front casters. For the front casters, I welded them with the MIG welder also, but I did it for a different reason. I didn't put plates to mount the casters to. I went ahead and welded the casters right to the frame. And the casters are galvanized, and so you can clean some of that galvanized material off, but you can't really get rid of all of it. It's pretty hard. So you don't want to breathe the fume from welding galvanized material. It can be pretty bad for you. So anyway, I like to MIG weld it, 1, because it goes a little better, and 2, because you're done faster and there's less opportunity to have that fume from the galvanized metal in the air. So I MIG welded those also, and that worked out pretty well. Just running a stringer bead along there. I had the running gear pretty much set. Next, it was time to make the mounts for the cylinder. So to do this, they're just 1-inch long pieces of angle iron, and I set the gas cylinder right in place so that I could put the mounts right up next to them and then get a nice tack on them before I pulled the gas cylinder off and welded them out. And so that gives a nice place, a little cradle for the cylinder to rest inside of when it's sitting on the cart. And I'm also using those as hooks to be able to attach the cylinder just with a tie down. And it's time to move on to paint. So a little bit of masking, and I sprayed on some hammered paint because I like that style finish, but you could use whatever you like to paint the frame. So after the paint was dry, it's time to go ahead and put on the wheels. So I slid the rear wheels on, put a washer on the outside and the cotter pin through, and bent it to retain those. Then I took the top shelf, drilled holes around it, evenly spaced, so I have 2 on the front and back, and then 3 on each side. And then I match drilled holes in the frame and put pop rivets in to hold it in place. And did the same thing with the bottom shelf, except I had to notch a corner out on the bandsaw, and I notched out about 1.25 inches so I'd have some clearance for the weld around this tubing. If you went right up tight to the tubing, it wouldn't be able to sit flush because there's a fillet weld inside there. So I got those notched out and riveted in place. And this side panel has 3 pop rivets, and that holds that. Now for these hooks, I just took a piece of aluminum bar, flat bar, and I used some vice grips to clamp it to a large socket, and then used a ratchet on that to crank it around to hold it in place. So once those were bent around, it was just a little bit of trimming. I drilled a couple holes, and I was ready to rivet those right in place. So that was the last finishing touch to put on the cart. So let's go ahead and put this machine on here and see how it looks. Okay, so I got it all loaded up. I got my cylinder and welder, the water cooler, torch, ground clamp, foot pedal, everything in its place. So I'm super happy with how it turned out. Everything rolls around great. I just used a tie down to hold the cylinder to those angle brackets that we put on. You could drill and tap some holes to bolt some chain on if you want, but I like how I can pull the tie down nice and snug to hold it in place. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time.